welcome to our summer 2025 webinar. And today we have the lovely pleasure of hosting Brielle. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I first met Brielle at a conference and she was a panelist for talking about autism and advocacy. And she was such an inspirational speaker that I'm like, oh my gosh, she would be such a great person to have for our webinar series. So, Brielle, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my presentation screen really quick. All right, how's that looking?
It looks great. If you could
Amazing.
bring it up a little bit, because I only see the
How is that?
maybe a little bit further up.
I think that is as big as it'll get.
Oh, and that looks great. Now we can see the whole thing.
Amazing.
Yay.
All right. So, a very brief introduction to me before we jump into everything. I'm Brielle Williams. I'm 22 years old. I actually turned 23 later this week. Woohoo! I am about 6 months out from completing my master's in special education at Utah Valley University. I have been working in ABA for about 4 years, in autism in general for six, and have had autism for about 23. So lots of experience in the field. My mom first noticed something was different with me when I was a newborn. I didn't sleep through the night until after my first birthday, which was a nightmare experience for both of us. The doctors kept telling her if you just leave her in the room and close the door, eventually she'll cry herself out. And I never did. I cried every night. Very fun. I was hyperlexic as a child, so I started speaking in full sentences in English when I was 13 months old. And in kindergarten, I was fluent in Spanish. I cannot speak Spanish anymore. But my second word was calculator, and I'm surprised they didn't give me an autism diagnosis right there. I shocked my parents right after my first birthday by singing the entirety of Family Tree by Ben Queller on a car ride home. So clearly, they had a genius child. But I wouldn't wear the clothes my mom picked out. These are the last known images of me in jeans, or let her brush my hair, or even really let her touch me. I fell behind my peers in coordinated motor movement and skills, being the last person in my grade to learn how to jump rope, the social currency of second grade. I didn't know how to interact with peers. I would script entire games and scenarios for us to play, then get frustrated and freak out when they didn't play the exact way I wanted them to. I started to get so anxious around peers at school that I would throw up during recess on a weekly basis. My mom was worried about my meltdowns and peer interactions, so she took me to a pediatrician who diagnosed me with she'll grow out of it, and I did not, and that is where it stayed for a while. So when I was 10 years old, I beat up another kid in my basement. It was not the first time I'd beat up another kid, but it was the first time I'd gotten caught. So he was, in hindsight, sensory seeking while I was sensory averse, but in the moment, he was annoying, and I needed him to back out of my face. Instead of getting upset with me, his parents gave my mom a book on sensory processing disorder. My mom started to fill out the symptom scales, and a worrying pattern began to emerge. My pediatrician, a new one, confidently gave me the diagnosis, and my occupational therapist referred me for an autism diagnosis. I officially received the diagnosis at age 14 after being on the wait list for 4 years. My insurance was really terrible about covering it and letting me in. So after waiting for that long, my mom actually paid for my diagnostic evaluation out of pocket so we would not have to wait any longer. My family went out the night I got my diagnosis to get froyo because it was 2016 and that's how we celebrated. And I learned that in my home, autism was something to celebrate and to have parties for and to go get froyo over. Thinking this would carry over, I excitedly told the people I thought were my friends about the diagnosis, and they belittled me, both behind my back and in front of my face. Then a fake Instagram account popped up with my name on it, made to mock me and post photos of me taken around school and make fun of me. And then I exited school one day to find my back tire slashed. So I learned autism was something that othered me and something that would keep me away from what I desperately wanted, interpersonal relationships. In the almost 9 years since then, I have engaged in a lot of self acceptance work, op ed writing, and teary eyed phone calls to my parents. But I've had relative success in life, not in spite of, but because of my diagnosis, thanks to the support of the people around me. And sometimes I think about the life that could have or would have been had I not been autistic, but I find it, at the very least, a lot less interesting than the life I lead right now. Nowadays, instead of stressing about interpersonal relationships and how people might perceive my autism, I dedicate my time to anime. I love and adore Naruto with all of my heart. I also read an absurd amount of mystery novels. So last year, I read the entire Hercule Poirot series by Agatha Christie. I collect physical media from secondhand stores, and I'm terrified of dogs. In this picture, I'm smiling because it was the first time in my life I touched a dog without crying, even though she's wrapped up in two blankets and none of my skin is touching her fur. I've been afraid of dogs for as long as I can remember, but it wasn't a big deal until my family moved to Colorado, where 42% of households have a dog. And as luck would have it, we also moved in across the street from a dog park. I could not walk to school alone because the second I saw a dog, I would scream and cry. Oftentimes, I would jump on top of cars, on top of mailboxes, or on top of other people's backs to try to get away from the perceived threat. My team, which at the time was my occupational therapist, my psychologist, and my mother, worked on self advocacy skills with dogs, but the situation did not get better. My family would go on hikes, and I would work up the courage through tears to ask adults to leash their dogs because I was very scared, and they would say, no. So now what? According to my mom, my therapist, and the current autism practices, I had self advocated, and I should have been rewarded with a leash dog. Thinking about these experiences, along with the recent increase in our discussions on self advocacy, led me to digging into the current literature on the subject. Specifically, how can we teach effective self advocacy skills? This review was my favorite and had the most relevant and up to date information on self advocacy as it relates to ABA. But a lot of what I found in general spoke vaguely about the notion of self advocacy, the importance of belonging, and the right people have to make their own decisions. All of which I agree with, but none of which was helpful in my search to actually teach the skill. However, some of this information might be helpful to you guys, so I wanted to knock out a few definitions here in the beginning so there isn't as much confusion later when we go into more depth. So, self advocacy is, in its essence, the ability to communicate your needs. This can be done through speaking, signing, using an augmented communication device, pointing, gesturing, or other communicative means. While in ABA, we tend to also include the ability to get our needs met in the definition of self advocacy. Special education refers to this drive as self determination. Before our learners can advocate, they need to have the background, drive, and skills that guide them towards advocacy. These two terms are often used interchangeably of each other in general autism services. In my search to learn about self advocacy, I relied very heavily on special education literature to help me fill in the gaps in ABA. What I came across when I started looking for self determination was the Martin and Marshall Choicemaker program, a checklist of skills that eventually lead to self advocacy. In this Choicemaker program, Martin and Marshall defined self advocacy with four components. The first is an awareness of personal needs, because how can you accommodate yourself when you don't know what you need accommodations for? This is a picture of one of my direct care clients and one of my favorite people to hang out with. I've had to block out his face since I'm only technically approved to share his photograph in training sessions, and I wasn't sure if this counted. Better safe than sorry, but it's too bad that you guys can't see how cute he is. What you can see is him eating his chicken nuggets for lunch. But for a long time, he would get violent, kicking, screaming, biting, punching, headbutting his staff and family when he was hungry, because he had no way to recognize hunger as an internal state. He'd been taught to how to ask for what he wanted, But how could he tell us what he wanted to eat if he couldn't recognize that he was hungry? What we did was introduce a discrimination training for internal states with hunger as our first target. Additionally, we kept preferred food open and readily available for him whenever he needed it. Anytime he reached for his food or started to eat, we would comment, "It looks like you're hungry." When he stopped eating, we would say, "You're full." Now he recognizes when he's hungry and will ask for goldfish, his lunch, to go to his backpack and check what he has to eat, or to go to the kitchen and see what snacks we've got. Once we taught him the first step of self-advocacy, all the other steps he'd been taught were able to fall into place. The second component is recognizing when your needs are not being met. I have always been aware that I need a lot of space and like to take time to myself, but I've struggled to recognize when my social battery actually burns out. It took my 16th birthday party for my family to realize that this need was not being met for me. My mom, after 3 years of people not showing up to my birthday parties, decided to take matters into her own hands and throw me one herself. She wanted to surprise me by going through my phone and grabbing the contacts of people I'd spoken positively about or texted recently. 1 hour into the big day, I was in my bathroom bawling my eyes out. I was inconsolable and couldn't explain why, and I ruined my own birthday party. My mom, a major extrovert, did not understand what had happened or why I was so upset. So we had a family meeting to talk about it because my mom also has a master's in special education and she currently works as an autism consultant for parents. So we are a family meeting family. I have a hard time recognizing and labeling emotions in the moment, but was able to articulate my needs once I'd calmed down. There were too many people, it was too loud, and I was expected to be a host for something I didn't know was going to happen. I thought we were going to the bookstore and having family dinner, but was surprised with needing to socialize with a group of people, only two of who were actually my friends. Using this, we recognized that I had four needs that weren't met. Small gatherings for shorter amounts of time, all the information about a social gathering in advance, the ability to take a break, and limited amounts of social pressure. Not knowing my needs weren't being met, despite knowing I had limited social needs, led me to ruining my birthday party. And the hurt and difficulty with this party led me to not having another traditional birthday party until last year. And we're trying again next weekend, so fingers crossed I don't end up bawling my eyes out in the bathroom. This leads into the third component, creating a plan to get those needs met. So how do we create a future birthday plan now knowing what my needs were and recognizing that a traditional birthday party did not meet those needs? We decided I would celebrate my birthdays from then on with just my family and a couple close friends in a familiar environment. For my 17th, my family went to the aquarium, then to my favorite Mexican restaurant with my two actual friends. This was much more enjoyable for me. So much so that we did the same thing for my 18th and my 19th and my 20th. So we created a plan for the future. We changed our course of action, and this transformed my birthday from something that I dreaded every year to something I was excited for. No more crying and hiding in the bathroom. Coming up with a plan is a strength of autism service providers. A lot of us have to write in-depth treatment plans every 6 months. We have to come up with goals for our clients. We have to come up with scripts and easily transferable mans. Other service providers have to find a focus for each therapy session, a goal to work towards in their life, or a plan for their child's future. I think we can take it a step further by more readily including our learners in the problem-solving aspects of creating that plan. I hated going to my autism therapy sessions as a teenager. In fact, I refused to attend my social group. I went one time and never again. I didn't think my psychologist valued what was important to me, and she often decided to focus on topics that were not concerning to me. Who cares if I bounce my leg? It doesn't bother me, but my autism therapist made me work on it. I didn't mind wearing sweatpants every day, but my OT set goals for me to wear jeans, a type of clothes I still won't put on. I never turned in an assignment late, but that's the one accommodation my high school provided me, instead of the ability to leave class when I felt overwhelmed. Treatment would have been so much more enjoyable and helpful to me if I'd felt I was being listened to by my service providers. Treatment would have been better if it was specific to me, not a copy paste of other autistic clients and assumptions based on those previous clients. I should have been included in my own treatment, and so should our learners. Outside of the kindness of including them, it also improves buy-in for our learners. When I came up with a plan for my birthday, I stopped dreading it and started looking forward to it. When our learners are actively involved in planning their own treatment, they will be more excited for their sessions. The final component from the Martin and Marshall definition is pursuing the plan, putting everything together to ask for or work towards what you want. As I mentioned earlier, the amount of research in teaching self-advocacy within ABA is dim, especially to children. Even the amount of research in other fields with children is not great. However, I am not a quitter. So instead of relying on other people to put out the research I wanted to see, I decided to put it out myself. In collaboration with my colleagues, Blake Noye, Dr. Anika Hoiberg, and Dr. Caleb Stanley, we designed a research study to teach this chain to some of the clients at our center. Children with autism need to be explicitly trained in self-advocacy, and they need multitudes of practice to master the skill, but they are not being trained or given as many opportunities to advocate for themselves. So we decided to teach self-advocacy skills in the context of being missed or skipped in 4 different social scenarios. 2 missed scenarios where 1 was trained and 1 was probed in baseline and generalization, and 2 skip scenarios with the same, 1 being trained and 1 being probed in baseline and generalization. Essentially what we did was we'd have social groups of 3 kids with 1 participant and 2 confederates come and join me for activities. During this group, we gave out candy, played Jenga, talked, and colored. Each time an opportunity arose, I would skip the participant child. During coloring, I would pass out markers to everybody except them. During games, I would skip over their turn and take it myself. In conversations, I would address everyone and talk to them except them. And when I passed out candy, the participant child would not get a piece. Each time an opportunity occurred, I would sit for 5 seconds and wait to see whether the child would notice and respond to this social slight. We were looking for our own variation of the Martin Marshall chain, which included some inspiration from Bambara and Gomez and Durlek and colleagues. Our specific chain was to first gain adult attention. This could be done by raising their hand, saying, "Hey," calling my name, or any functionally equivalent response without yelling or crying. Most of the participants ended up saying, "Hey, Brielle," or "Excuse me, Brielle." Then they would have to label what was wrong. They could say, "You skipped my turn, you missed me, I didn't get any," or any other response that addressed the situation. Our hope in adding this step was that it would help our learners generalize this chain to other scenarios. We could have taught them specifics for each and every scenario, but this way was more likely to appear outside of our structured research setting. In fact, our third participant has used this chain in other scenarios around the center. Once a material was missing for our school group, and he said, "Hey, Brielle, the month card is missing." And then he completed the chain with, "We need to go find it." This is a correct response for our last step of requesting a solution. Often what I heard was, "I need one," or "I need a turn." So in the end, it looks like, "Excuse me, Brielle, you skipped me. I need a turn." So we ran this chain using their technicians as prompters during the intervention phase, and here were our results. It was non-concurrent baseline, so I chopped up our graph a little bit so that you can see the results better rather than one long graph. But all of our participants were able to master and generalize all the scenarios except for one, advocating for themselves when they were skipped in a social situation or social conversation. This may be related to a lack of social motivation or a lack of underlying social communication skills. It's worth looking into because often school-aged autistic children need to advocate when they are being bullied or harassed by peers. I would like to do an extension on this in the future that focuses on bullying, but Fallon and her colleagues just put out a study in JABA earlier this year that addresses a lot of the specifics. But if you look here in our baseline, there were little to no skills in self-advocacy. Our third participant demonstrated no self-advocacy skills whatsoever. When I skipped his turn or missed him, he would furrow his brow and then stare at me or his peers at the table, but he never complained or stood up for himself, even though at the time of the study, he had been receiving services for 3.5 years. Here is participant 3 now, almost a year out from the study when I passed out candies to everyone except him at a group game.
I didn't get one.
What do you need?
I need a candy.
Here you go, man.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. So he still has these skills, and they weren't very difficult to teach him. So why aren't we teaching them earlier? As of July 2025, the study that we conducted is one of 2 applied behavioral analysis studies that teaches these skills to children in the clinical setting. The other is a PhD dissertation that was published only like 3 weeks ago. We need to be doing more because this is what can and does happen when we fail to teach children these skills. 9 out of 10 autistic women have been victims of sexual violence, with 66% of it happening while they are children or teenagers. By the time we teach this skill to adults, it's too late. And I don't know what the solution to this problem is. It's why I'm planning on getting my PhD, but we have to start somewhere. And I would start by utilizing this chain. I think it's a great definition that works for a lot of situations. However, by this definition, 10-year-old me did self-advocate and was still left with no leash dog. Excuse me if I get a little heated here. This makes me very angry. I knew I was afraid of dogs and liked them to be on a leash to help me feel safe. I recognized when a dog was not leashed. I created a plan with my mom on how to ask people to leash their dogs, and I asked people to leash their dogs. But my needs were still not met because other people are kind of jerks and don't care if a 10-year-old girl is bawling her eyes out on the sidewalk. So I would like to add a 5th part to this definition, one that is my very own: self-reliance. And this is the hardest step, and it's not going to be applicable for every learner in every situation. But I see a lot that we as autism service providers and parents are setting our learners up for failure by teaching them, however inadvertently, to rely on us rather than themselves. And this comes from a place of love. We don't want things to be hard for the people we care about, so we remove the ability for them to practice perseverance, grow their self-determination, and learn how to advocate. Prompt dependency and dependency in general is already a major criticism of ABA. And I fear that by not including self-reliance as a step to self-advocacy, we are exacerbating this dependency. Something I see all the times in clinics is what I call the "I need space" or learned helplessness problem. Tell me if this sounds familiar. A learner joins a group of their peers, they hang out for a while, the learner recognizes they're done spending time with their peers and says something to the extent of, "I need space." This is not the problem. I see the problem occur when other children are ushered away by well-meaning technicians. "Hey, our friend says they need space." Whenever I see this happening, I imagine our learner in a grocery store, using their self-advocacy skills and expecting, from their experience, that the other patrons will leave the area. I don't like to imagine the meltdown that might occur when they realize other people probably aren't going to leave. When I see the "I need space" problem, I want to grab the staff ushering their kids out and tell them, wait. If they want space, they can learn to take their own space, not rely on everyone else leaving to get what they want. Let me paint another picture of the "I need space" problem. This is my little sister, Grace. Among other things, she has misophonia, so she cannot handle even the sound of people breathing near her. If my family was engaging in the "I need space" problem, we would stop breathing. But we are not going to stop breathing to try and accommodate her, even though that is what she has asked for repeatedly. To practice her self-reliance, she can stand up and move herself somewhere else, or put headphones on. Neither of these solutions rely on other people for her needs to be met. So how did I learn self-reliance with my fear of dogs? Well, my family got a dog and had it trained very intensely. This dog did not bark, lick, or jump. If I told him phooey or go, he would leave the room. He was also sectioned just to the ground floor and the outside area, and my bedroom was on the second floor. So, hypothetically speaking, I could not come into contact with him for days at a time, but I knew he was there. So, I started off dependent, but by having this fear, this is the biggest fear I've ever had in my life, is of dogs, under my control, I gradually learned that I can control myself, even if I don't have total control over the situation I'm in. Now, I still don't like dogs, but I can spend time around them because I know I can advocate for myself by asking people to leash their dogs or keep them in another room or not bring them when we hang out. And when they decide not to do these things, I can rely on myself by leaving or choosing to deal with it depending on how I'm feeling and how much I want to be a part of the activity. Just last week, a group of coworkers invited me to a scary movie night, and I was ready to go, ready to say yes. And then one of them texted, "Oh, by the way, I'm dog sitting for my parents, so I'm going to have 4 dogs there." And using my self-reliance skills, I said, "Hey, this sounds like a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it, but I'd love to come next time." Teaching me the last step, self-reliance, helped me not overcome this fear of dogs. I'm still very afraid, but to take the matter into my own hands and advocate for myself effectively. My "can you please leash your dog?" turned to, "Mom, I'm gonna loop around and meet you back in a minute." Now, when I go on a walk and there's a dog, I cross the street. I don't scream and cry or jump on other people's cars. When we promote not just self-advocacy, but self-reliance whenever possible, we are setting our learners up for their best possible outcomes. However, the opportunities to promote self-reliance are not going to be the same with each of our learners. I've found that people with profound autism or high support needs or level 3 or however else people like to refer to it, I'm not here to debate linguistics, so I'm going to switch these terms out interchangeably while I discuss this group, are often forgotten in our conversation about autism in favor on focusing on people like me. I am more palatable to the general public. I am relatable to non-autistic people. I am easier to do research with. In fact, research including those with high support needs has decreased since the autism diagnosis was changed in the DSM-5 to incorporate what would have been Asperger's syndrome, PDD, NOS, and autism disorder as one diagnosis. I have found no research articles published within the last 15 years on teaching self-advocacy to those with profound autism. Researchers often require that their participants have high verbal skills, a blunder in my own study. In this discussion around self-advocacy, I think that people with high support needs are often ignored, not because we do not care about them or notice them, though that may be the case for some, but because it is a lot more difficult to teach them these skills. Additionally, there might be skills that are more important to teach them or that we believe it's not important for them to learn advocacy at all. But at its core, self-advocacy is the ability to communicate needs, and self-reliance is our ability to get those needs met. Here's a pyramid of self-advocacy skills that my friend and colleague Audrey Vogel made. I would put self-reliance in the top 2 tiers. It is valuable and important for independent functioning, but people who struggle to or cannot function independently still need the skills from the other tiers. And maybe when those have developed, we can address the rest. A lot of the time, our final goal for autism interventions and assistance is independent living. But I think this should be changed to most independent living. This is going to differ from person to person. My most independent living is living by myself with a roommate or spouse, holding a full-time job, and managing my own daily tasks and schedule. I am very lucky. This is not the reality for 90% of autistic individuals. Some people's most independent living is going to be living in an assisted care home, being managed by their parents, working part-time or not at all, or having 24/7 staffing and support. But my goal for every one of my clients, including myself, is that they can communicate in a way that is functional for them and can access help when they need it. Let it be verbally, using an AAC, using sign language, pointing, guiding people towards things, or whatever else. This to me is also self-advocacy. My friend Kaylin Partlow has talked to me about the importance of shifting towards interdependence rather than just independence. For our high support needs learners, this is especially valuable. Self advocacy, though the word self exists as part of it, does not need to be a wholly individual process. One of my favorite clients at work engages in self injurious behavior at a rate at about 4,000 times per therapy day. It would be wholly inappropriate for me to take time away from teaching him how to keep himself safe to try and teach him higher order advocacy skills, especially when he does not come into contact with a lot of the situations we teach self advocacy for. He's not getting bullied at school, he's hanging out on a safety mat with me. But I still provide him scenarios to work on interdependence with me. He has his own room to help him stay calm and safe throughout the day, and recently his peers have been incredibly interested in coming in and hanging out with him. While I would love for him to have more social interactions, I choose these moments to practice interdependence with him by asking if he's okay with friends coming into his room or not. A lot of the times he says yes, but this past week he has been saying no every time, no matter what, even if he wants them to come in. And when he says no, I will hold that boundary for him. Even amidst other children crying and begging, I make sure his advocacy is respected. Interdependence is incredibly important for high support needs loved ones to have, especially when these loved ones are non-speaking or have limited to no communication skills. Some of these children cannot tell us what they need, but we can look at what their behavior is telling us. Behavior is, in its essence, a form of communication. And when we have people in our lives who cannot communicate with their words, we must listen to their behavior. In the second grade, my sister would end school by crying in the car every day. She could not tell my mom why she was so upset or what was going on, but my mom saw her behavior and started the process to change her schools, even though she was currently attending the most prestigious charter school in our district. People told her, my mom, that my sister must just not like school, that she would get used to it, that it wasn't worth throwing away this opportunity. But my mom didn't listen and pulled her out anyways. At her new school, my sister came back to the car happy, no tears. We still don't know what was happening in her charter school, but her crying was her advocacy, and my mom recognized this behavioral communication and shifted towards interdependence to help solve this issue. I don't think the definition of self-advocacy needs to change to support our level 3 learners, but I do think our approach needs to change. At my job, I have a supervision caseload of 8 learners. Of these 8, 3 have high support needs, including medical complexities. I already touched on one, but I'd like to touch on the other 2 and how we are promoting self-advocacy and self-reliance skills for them. One of my learners has a G-tube, and the one thing I want for him is the ability to feed himself as much as possible. I want basic bodily autonomy for him, which includes choosing when he gets to eat. So I broke the task down into the smallest sections I could think of. Opening his lunchbox, grabbing his food and water, opening the G-tube port, hooking the tube into his feeding syringe, using the syringe to pull the food into the tube, pushing the food, removing his hook, and closing his port. And we started with the simplest and most basic task, opening his port, and have added the other steps from simplest to hardest one at a time, until hopefully one day he can complete his feeding mostly independently. The first time he pushed his food from his syringe into his tube, he was so incredibly proud of himself that he went around the center saying, "Watch me!" and pantomiming pushing the syringe for the whole rest of the day. It's been about 6 months since we started working on it, and he can complete roughly half of his feeding steps by himself. I don't know if he'll be able to do it totally independently, but if this is his most independent self, then that is still hugely exciting for me. We have been working on identifying her with another high support needs client for about 6 months as well. I have downloaded so many videos of cartoon characters getting crushed by anvils to try and demonstrate hurt to her. But the struggle and hard work of teaching her was all worth it when last week she started banging her head against the wall, then stopped and pointed to hurt and head on her choice board. Seeing her recognize those needs and communicate them with us was the highlight of my week last week, but not as big as when her BCBA told me that she went to the doctor and pointed at her and stomach to relay to him that she was having a stomach ache. We have been working on this for so long, and it has taken forever, but it's all worth it when they're able to advocate their needs to people and tell people what's wrong. So it is not impossible to teach self-advocacy skills to people with profound autism. It takes more time and more intention, and it's going to look different, but you can do it, and it is worthwhile to do it. There are plenty of ways to promote both self-advocacy and self-reliance in autistic individuals, including those with high support needs. But we need to start teaching and promoting these skills as early as possible. To help you all learn how to teach self-advocacy at home, in the clinical setting, or with yourself, I've created and compiled a list of goals. This is a goal for parents, though it can also be for clinicians, that I wanted to get out of the way because it is the hardest one I have from a parent perspective. Let your child fail. I've mentioned this multiple times in the course of the presentation, but I did not have friends growing up. That is not to say I never had any friends, but I would make friends and then fight with them viciously because I did not have empathy skills or the ability to stand up to myself to peers. Kids forgive and forget, but once you start hitting teenage years, people are no longer as kind about social faux pas, and honestly, someone just being straight up mean to you. And I was so mean to other people, but I didn't know it. I would come home crying to my mom at least once a week about how much everyone hated me and how I would never find anyone who would like me. And she would sit and read through my text messages with me and try to explain where I'd gone wrong and how the other person might have been feeling. And I, the very grateful child that I was, would yell and scream at her for taking other people's sides and not letting me have my own feelings and never supported me or being on my side for anything, ever. And she gradually learned to step back and let me come to her if I had questions, but let me cry it out and figure it out myself. And it was really hard. I am almost 23 now, and I have exactly 2 friends from before I was 20 because I blew up every single friendship in my life. But I learned the skill. I learned how to talk to people, how to stand up for myself politely, and how to disagree without letting it ruin a friendship. This does not mean to never step in or always let your child soldier things out on their own. My mom learned to let me handle my difficulties with perspective taking by myself, but when my tires were slashed at school, she sure as hell did not use that as a time to practice my advocacy skills. She marched right into the school herself and ripped the administration a new one about actually following through on their bullying policies. But we can start with smaller skills, opening their own chip bags, dressing themselves, even if their outfit's ugly, handling their own friendship conflicts, and work up to bigger things. When we are teaching people how to fail, we are also teaching them to persevere and handle difficult things in the future. And I wouldn't have my friendships I cherish today if my mom did not let me handle and fail my friendships of the past because I never would have learned. People have the right to fail, and people have the right to make wrong decisions. To best support our learners, we have to let them do both of these things. What's most important is that we're there as backup when they need our help. We can let them persevere, but when it gets too hard, we need to step in. If your child can't open their chip bag after trying, getting frustrated, and calming down, then you open it for them. If your client wears terribly ugly outfits, the way I did in middle school, you don't target it until it bothers them. When I ruined all my friendships, my mom stopped stepping in until I came to her. Failure teaches us perseverance, which then leads to both self-reliance and interdependence, the 2 things we are trying to promote. Because either they'll figure it out themselves or they'll realize that they cannot figure it out themselves and come to you for help, however that may be. So now let's move on to some of my easier skills. I'm going to continue to steal the beautiful infographic from my friend Audrey to again give some different examples of different levels of self-advocacy and how we could promote skills in clinic and in home. One of the most basic skills we can promote is the awareness of feelings. We already excel at labeling feelings that we perceive as negative. I hear this in my clinic all the time. You feel sad. You look angry. You seem frustrated. Should we take a break? I did this today as one of my kids was yelling and screaming at me. Hey man, it looks like you feel out of control. But I think it's equally important to label positive feelings. In my work, I've seen a lot of specificity in negative emotions, but not as many in positive emotions. I've seen this chart or similar used across many different centers and in home. And it's a great chart, except for the fact that all our positive emotions are grouped into one section. I think that there is just as much variation in positive emotions as negative ones, and it is equally important to make those distinctions. I was trained on recognizing my feelings, but really only the negative emotions, as a way to try and help me learn coping skills for each of these, not for my positive ones. And this has come around to cause unnecessary difficulties for me later in life, especially with dating. So, kind of a low stakes example to keep things light. From ages 13 to 21, I would date anybody who asked me out, whatever dating for a 13-year-old is, because while I recognized logically that love, like, and happy were different emotions, I had no way to distinguish them apart from each other. All positive emotions were labeled the same to me. Happy, green zone. I was happy to hang out with them, so I probably also liked them because they say liking me or even being in love with me means that they're happy to be around me. And that's the same. So for about 8 years of my life, I just dated people who asked who I liked to be around. I had no way to advocate for myself and tell them I did not want to date them or that I didn't like them like that because I didn't know. From ages 19 to 20, I dated a girl for almost a year who I, looking back, had no romantic feelings for because I could not distinguish like and love from each other. And when I saw how much that relationship hurt her, I knew I had to take a break from dating entirely and go back to autism therapy to figure out how to distinguish my positive emotions from each other. I put in the work after I was in autism therapy from about 11, I guess 10 if you count OT, 10 to 19, stopped, went back at 20 after a year, went back for a whole year, and now, about 3 years later, I've been in a happy relationship where we both like each other for almost a year, but I made him work for it. And I spent a lot of time in the beginning thinking about my feelings and trying to label them. Do I like spending time with him romantically or as a friend? My therapist told me I'd probably know I like someone if I wanted to hold their hand and kiss them. And after going on dates for about 3 months, we held hands. I liked it. I wanted to do more of that. So I told him we could be boyfriend, girlfriend. Oh, how sweet. I've continued to monitor these feelings to make sure because I don't want to hurt anyone the way I hurt my ex-girlfriend ever again. But imagine if I'd been taught the differences between positive emotions more as a child. It would have been nice to circumvent all that dating weirdness entirely. Dating is an exceptionally lower stakes example because I didn't want to freak people out with more dramatic ones. But these feelings awareness skills are important for more than just using coping skills. We can start with happy, sad, angry, scared, but once those are grasped, we should go even further, especially for positive emotions. Another very basic skill set is self-awareness skills in general. I mentioned awareness of feelings and needs earlier, but what about the even more basic building blocks? We should teach our learners awareness that they are a person and what a person is. We should teach awareness of body parts and what these body parts do. Can they recognize what is their arm versus their finger versus their fingernail? We should then teach the awareness of what their body is feeling. Are they cold, hungry, sick, tired, satisfied? We should teach them to recognize what their body is doing, running, walking, sitting, swinging. These are basic skills that I would teach through modeling, stimulus discrimination, and natural environment teaching. These are skills that a lot of you are probably already working on and teaching your learners, but I don't think that a lot of people recognize that they are building blocks for self-advocacy. This is what I would consider step one. Along with promoting awareness of feelings and general self-awareness, we should also promote awareness of preferences. I do not struggle with this. My life is very special interest centric, but I am aware of my preferences because my mom has always promoted them, even when they were too childish or strange to be fully appropriate. I'm almost 23 years old and I had a Naruto-themed birthday party last year, and I have a Littlest Pet Shop collection down there on my shelf because my mom fostered my ability to say what I like. But I'm lucky in that I can tell people what I like. A lot of autistic people cannot share their preferences with us verbally, but that does not mean we can't recognize them. I recently started working with the youngest child in my state to ever receive an autism diagnosis. So he received a diagnosis at 15 months. Outside of him being the cutest kid I have ever seen in my life, I'm coming across new difficulties that I have never faced before in treatment. Of course, even very young children have preferences, but I struggle to figure out how to identify these preferences when he can't tell me and he doesn't visually attend to stimuli the way that other learners do when you get older. But as we learned earlier, he can still show me with other types of behavior. A type of preference assessment that I don't see discussed much is the single choice successive preference assessment. Essentially, you present them one item at a time, record if they approached it, if they engaged with it, if they had problem behavior, and then how long they engaged with the item. And I learned rather quickly that he likes toys with sound, music, motor sensory toys that he can flip or push, and toys with holes in them. I've used those preferences to arrange his play environment so that he can enjoy our sessions more and be more motivated to engage in play, which given his age is one of the only skills we're working on. This is also a great way to find the preferences of people with high support needs. It does not require the difficulties of scanning an array, of moving yourself to engage with the item, and to give up the item after a specified amount of time. I am not an expert in single choice successive preference assessments, but I did write up some instructions in my own data sheet, which you can see here. It's also important that people recognize what they don't like. I have included a very vulnerable collage of things that I hate. You can use this preference assessment to establish this as well. What did they not approach, not engage with, or have challenging behaviors when they were presented? As a child, I would scream and cry if a dog was in my presence, if a banana was open near me, and if my younger brother started crying. Now, as an adult, I do not like going outside in the summer. I hate the Kamikaze album by Eminem, and I thought the recent Garfield movie was pretty atrocious. My family learned to start opening bananas in different rooms, or if you're my younger brother, torment me with them by throwing an empty peel in my room. And I learned to avoid things I dislike. After we establish preferences, we can work on training this recognition. I've done so by printing off established likes and dislikes, then having my learners sort them on a T-chart. I like to keep it super simple. With these skills, we can build up and have people then request things they like or request removal of things they do not like. This is very basic self-advocacy. Additionally, when we recognize what we like and dislike, we are also recognizing our values and morals at a very base level. This leads to more informed decision-making later in life. I like Naruto, a story about optimism, hard work, and kindness. Guess what values help guide my decision-making? Another way to promote self-advocacy with our learners is to provide them with opportunities to make choices, then follow through with the choice they make, even if we think they made the wrong one. When people in general make choices, they are more likely to participate in activities, they develop independent living skills, their challenging behaviors reduce, and their on-task performance increases. A lot of choices that I see offered to autistic individuals are what I refer to as fake choices. Do you want to work at the table in 4 minutes or 5 minutes? Do you want to start with the math worksheet or the writing worksheet? Essentially, choices where the outcome is the same, no matter what they select, and when their choice doesn't actually matter in the outcome. There are times when it is unavoidable to provide choices like this. I would never provide the choice to wear or not wear a seatbelt to a child, but may offer the choice for whether they have a cushion strap on it or not. Fake choice. In fact, even these fake choices are associated with increased preference, even with non-preferable activities. But we should not be only providing opportunities to choose that do not impact the general outcomes of situations. We can best promote independent living skills and advocacy by allowing real, genuine choice making. I got to choose where I went to college. I got to choose what I majored in. I chose where I lived. I chose what I'm wearing right now. I chose to give this presentation. Our lives are our choices. And when we do not let people make their own choices, we do not let them live their own lives. We can teach this skill by starting with the fake choices, then challenging them to be more complex. At my center, there are a few teenagers who get to choose whether or not they work on goals that day. There are, of course, a lot of reinforcements in place to try to motivate them to work, but the uncoerced choice is theirs. In fact, we have one client who gets to choose whether or not he even attends his sessions. As I was relaying this information to the members of my cohort, their minds were blown. What if he chooses to never come? Then he doesn't get the benefits of therapy. It's his choice. And 95% of the time, he does choose to come. I was not given the choice to go to my therapies or not, and I have found this negatively impacts me to this day. I wasn't given a lot of choices as a child, and I am still struggling to make large choices. While it is true that I made the choice on where to go to college and what to get my master's degree in, because I could have said no or changed it, my mom essentially picked for me. It was an informed decision that we talked about at length, but I didn't feel like I had the choice-making skills to decide something like that. Maybe if I was provided with more choice as a child, I wouldn't struggle with it so hardly now. In our next level of advocacy, we can work on explicitly teaching people with autism how to ask for help. Being able to ask for help increases their access to interdependence. Almost every person I know, autistic or not, struggles to ask for help. But it is an essential skill to developing relationships with others, reducing stress, and improving mental health. I know that I talked about the importance of self-reliance, but that does not mean we can never ask for help. I ask my mom for help all the time. Every time I got stuck on this presentation, including about 3 hours ago, I was on the phone with my mom asking her for help. I've taught this skill largely through modeling. As clinicians, we can ask our clients for help when applicable. I ask my learners to help me get their materials, help me pick things up, and help me come up with their schedules. Same goes for parents, or you can ask other family members for help in front of your autistic child. Not only should we model how to ask for help, but also that it is okay to do so. We can also teach people to recognize unfairness. As an elementary school student, I was definitely treated unfairly by my peers. I would ask them to play, and they would say no. I would try to join in games at research, and they would tell me, go away. But I didn't recognize that this was unfair. I thought it was actually fair that people could pick who they did and did not want to spend time with, even if that meant all of our classmates were playing a game together and I was sitting on the bench. This was the crux of our research study on self-advocacy, though we also added the skill to rectify this unfairness. But to be able to rectify it, we need to know how to recognize it. Outside of the research study, I have taught unfairness through role play, social stories, and environment and opportunities. I'll point out to my learners when they're being treated unfairly by their peers or when they're being unkind to others. And if they're being unkind, I will have them fix the situation. My parents taught us about fairness by getting us this Monopoly Cheaters Edition game, where the point of the game is to be unfair to each other. By the time we finished playing, me and both of my brothers were so angry at each other that we needed to take a break for the rest of the day. It was a quick lesson. We only ever played the game once before throwing it in the trash, but it stuck with me. With recognizing unfairness, I think we also need to be people that our learners can come to when they're being treated unfairly. I've mentioned this a handful of times, but individuals with autism are far more likely to be bullied, abused, and mistreated than the general population. I don't really believe in snitching as a concept when it comes to telling people how others are treating you, even if it's annoying. I love that I am someone the kids at my center come to tell about unfairness. I'll be working on a treatment plan or whatever in my office, and suddenly a kid and a hurried technician will be at my desk telling me about how one of the other kids was mean to them. And I take them seriously and I talk to them about it and I believe them. Because people have not always believed me. When I was in middle school, I joined the yearbook club, and I was really good at writing the articles for the yearbook. But in 8th grade, I wanted to change clubs and do the play and musical instead. When the yearbook teacher found out, and I cannot believe this, he cornered me in the hallway, got in my face, and yelled at me until I passed out onto the ground. I cannot remember ever being terrified the way that I was in that moment. And that's what I looked like when he did that to me. So imagine being 45 and shouting at a kid like that at that age. He then yelled at me to get up off the ground and dragged me to the front office. Luckily, my middle school administration was not so comically evil and recognized the lawsuit that could happen. So they called the cops and they also called my mom. And the front office woman told her that she needed to come and get me, and that whatever she tells you, I need you to believe her because he keeps getting away with this. So it turns out I was not the first student that a similar incident happened to, but apparently the other students' parents could not believe that a teacher would do something like that to a student, so they did not push the matter. My parents did, and he got suspended. But there was more than that. My mom has taken this phrase to heart. She started to listen to me when I talked about being treated unfairly and started rallying in my corner. Feeling like someone was on my side helped tremendously, even if the mistreatment did not go away. Obviously, kids lie and kids tease and kids make up stories, but I think we should still try and treat them with seriousness. And we should all work on believing and supporting rather than always playing the devil's advocate role. On the next level of self advocacy, we start to hit some of our problem solving and self reliance skills. The first one of these I want to touch on is setting boundaries. This is one of the final forms of recognizing likes and dislikes. My biggest pet peeve is when people are late for things. I find it super disrespectful of me and my time. So I have set the boundary with my friends. If you are more than 15 minutes late and didn't tell me ahead of time that you're going to be late, I'm just going to leave whatever our plans were. I think it's also important to understand that boundaries are not rules we impose on other people, they are rules we impose on ourselves. As a freshman in college, I had a roommate say to me, "It's my boundary that you can't have your girlfriend over." That is not a boundary. A boundary would be when you have your girlfriend over, I'm going to leave, or could you please text me before she's coming over? Or when your girlfriend's here, I feel uncomfortable, so I'd prefer it if you're in your bedroom. If I'm in the room, I'm going to head elsewhere. And I told her that's not a boundary, and she was so mad she left the apartment for the night. So we can teach boundaries to people by teaching them to say and accept no, and also by listening when a child says no. A blunder I made when I first started as a behavioral technician was providing a real, non-fake choice when that wasn't an option. Mom was waiting outside and I said, "Are you ready for pickup?" And they said, "No." And then I took them out anyways. And they were so mad at me. And I think about that moment all the time. It is my greatest regret as an RVT. I have not violated a child's no since then. Because I remember being a kid and having people not listen when I said no. When I was a child, my family attended a church where most of the members of the congregation would touch you without asking. And if you remember from way back at the beginning of my presentation, I hated being touched, especially by strangers. One day I'd had enough and decided to stand up for myself. A man came up to me and tried to shake my hand, and I said, "No, thank you." And he went ballistic. He told my parents that I was the most disrespectful little girl he'd ever met, and that if they were better parents, I would know to accept his handshake. My stepdad is a champion and responded to the extent of, "It's actually kind of creepy that you want my 10-year-old daughter to touch you so badly." And the guy had no rebuttal to that. But I remember how terrible it was to have my no, my basic boundary, my self advocacy questioned and almost violated. And I refuse to do that to a child again. When no isn't a choice or isn't an option, I simply don't offer it. Or I offer one of those fake choices. Do you want to go now or in 2 minutes that I talked about earlier? We can also teach boundary skills by following through on contingencies that we place. As a supervisor, I see staff place contingencies on their client all the time. Here is one of my most favorite examples. So, a staff member was relaying to me a nightmare scenario he had while baking a cake with one of his clients. Essentially, this boy loves stirring the batter, but he'd like to take the spoon out and lick it and then put it back in and keep stirring. Not super sanitary when you're making cake for a lot of people. The staff kept saying to him, "Hey man, if you lick the spoon, I can't let you stir anymore." He was frustrated with the situation, and the stirring and licking happened over and over again until the batter was done. So I asked, "Well, did you stop letting him stir?" To which the staff replied, "No, he loves stirring." And I could not hold back the slightest sigh, which the staff member noticed. "What?" "Well, you taught him that your boundaries don't actually matter." Oh. The next time they baked a cake, the staff followed through on the contingency. Guess what has not happened since? In a similar vein, after people establish their boundaries, we have to teach them how to stand up for themselves when those boundaries are crossed. Guess what? When people are more than 15 minutes late for our hangout, I leave. At one point, I had a friend who would invite me to her own house and then show up an hour after she told me to come over. So I would sit in my car and twiddle my thumbs and wait for her. But when I started to stand up for myself, I would text her after waiting 15 minutes, tell her that I'd see her another time, and go home. I'm actually no longer friends with this person, and a big aspect of this was that she could not show up to things on time, and I could not handle waiting for her anymore. Now, being chronically late doesn't make someone a bad person, but it makes them a bad match for me. It's difficult and feels hard to stand up for yourself and maintain boundaries. I really didn't want to end a friendship on the basis of lateness because that feels kind of stupid, but it is an essential skill, especially for autistic individuals who are more likely to be bullied by others than their non autistic peers, and who are, in general, more vulnerable than the rest of the population. In special education literature, the final target skill is typically having autistic people sit in on their own IEP meetings and requesting accommodations themselves. This balances self-advocacy, recognizing likes and dislikes, understanding your needs, standing up for themselves, persistence, and problem solving. I think that we should have children sit on in their treatment meetings before they have these skills, and even if they may never develop these skills. It's important to let people in the room when we're discussing them. It's important to model the skills we want them to see, and it's important to include them in their own treatment. Sometimes this might not be possible, but I think it's worth striving towards. I do not work in schools, and my high school refused, possibly illegally, to provide me with an IEP or 504 plan, so I'm definitely not an expert in accommodations. That being said, my mom is an IEP counselor, and I've participated very heavily in my college accommodation process and discussed it on an episode of her podcast, Navigating the Spectrum, if you're interested in learning more. But I will share this short story. Since I had not received legitimate accommodations before, I had no idea what I needed or wanted going into my college academic accommodation meeting, but I knew that I was suffering and struggling in ways that other students were not. Instead of focusing on my self-reliance, I leaned into the interdependence. I called my mom and asked about options, and together we checked what was on my university website. It turns out that I was entitled, through the Accessibility Center of my university, to an IEP advocate in my meeting, and thus my interdependence circle grew. I met with the advocate and the woman in charge of me in the Accessibility Center, and they showed me what accommodations they usually provide to autistic individuals, and then they listened to my concerns and believed what I told them. One accommodation that the three of us came up with together was that I was to be assigned groups in class for group assignments rather than having to seek it out on my own. This saved my butt so many times in university, as anytime there was a group project, I would sit in my chair, terrified, and wait for people to approach me, and they never did. So this accommodation wiped all of that anxiety. After receiving my accommodation letter, thanks to the help of others, I reached and maintained a 4.0 throughout college. When my yearly renewal came along, I was able to lean on my self reliance and tell my new accommodation officer what I needed, all by myself. Sometimes, however, these accommodations are not enough. My younger brother had a 504 plan starting in the third grade, and when he hit sixth grade, his teacher refused to follow the 504 letter. He had two main accommodations that she did not follow. Don't call on him if he doesn't raise his hand, and no public call outs. If she had feedback for him, she had to tell him privately, not as an announcement in front of the class. He would come home humiliated because she wouldn't follow those two rules. My brother thought he was stupid and bad, even though he's a borderline genius who graduated high school at 15. Sister brag. My parents went to the school multiple times to complain, but they also helped place the matter into my brother's hands. My parents are both very aggressive when it comes to their kids, so my mother printed out and laminated multiple copies of his 504 plan and put it in my brother's backpack. She told him that anytime his teacher did those things, he should pull it out of his backpack and hand it to her. This was the self advocacy he was capable of doing when faced with an authority figure. He didn't have to say anything, he just handed her the papers. I'm not sure if that was what worked or if it was the threats of legal action against the school district, but it stopped. And by giving my brother the means to advocacy, he felt more confident in himself. He knew that he wasn't doing anything wrong and was able to build back his confidence. The final goal of all these ways to promote self advocacy is self reliance and fully independent problem solving. Self reliance is, to me, the highest order of self advocacy skill that someone can learn, and it is our responsibility to help individuals with autism learn how to form their foundational skills and eventually promote self reliance to the best of our and their ability. Thank you. And now I would love to open up the floor for questions, and there's my email if you want to contact me.
Thank you so much, Brielle. That was such an inspirational talk, and I learned so much. And everything you said, I 1,000% agree with you. And so if you guys have any questions, you could put it in the chat, or you could feel free to use the Q&A option. We do have a question, so I will let you read that. And then I'll also read it out loud. It says, I work with a moderately high functioning autistic girl whose parents are very focused on discipline. They often use reprimands, scolding, and even timeout to teach appropriate behavior. They believe their approach has been working fine. However, I have noticed the girl who was always very cheerful is becoming more anxious and sad looking in recent times. Any suggestions how to discuss the right steps with the caregivers without making them feel schooled and as a result stop the therapy altogether?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Let me pull this up on the Q&A so I can see everything all at once. That is super hard. I'm actually very afraid of telling parents that anything they're doing is wrong because I'm 22 and don't have kids. So this would also be a terrifying discussion for me. But I think what I would do is talk to the caregivers about promoting her independent skills and being able to manage herself and her own tasks. I'm almost certain that her parents don't enjoy micromanaging her or having to put her in timeout or having to scold her all the time. So I think if we're able to promote her as being more independent as a way to get them to be kinder to her, that might be a good first step. And then possibly talking to them about the benefits of positive reinforcement and how punishment essentially doesn't change behavior. It just makes whatever it is stop while the punishment is in place. So once they stop doing timeouts, if they're not taking time to reinforce her and teach her the skills she needs, everything they've been reprimanding is going to come back. So that is not like a long-term effective solution for them.
And I think if for me to add, because I do a lot of parent education, and my perspective kind of changed after I became a parent, but I would also say, like, if you're a therapist, also like modeling a lot of that positive reinforcement and like really like highlighting how great this child is doing. I think sometimes just like being very purposeful and having the parents see how you interact, I think sometimes that has helped because sometimes I also get very intimidated by trying to like tell parents what they're doing incorrectly, and that kind of feels a little wrong sometimes. So, we have another question. Brielle, if you could go back and talk to yourself and the students who made fun of you and slashed your tires, what would you tell them based on what you have learned since then?
I actually don't know who slashed my tires still. So this is just my addressing the group. Um, what it was I did high school theater and I was really good at singing and really good at acting because it was fun to pretend to be somebody else. And when you're good at things and you're strange, people don't like to see you succeed because they think you being strange should prevent you from success. So I would probably tell them what I did tell them, which was stop being mean to me. I said it lots of times. And then the other thing I think I like have nightmares about this situation still, right? Because it's not like being bullied and harassed for years and years and people telling you to kill yourself for 3 years does not really leave you when the situation has left. And the fear of being attacked doesn't leave you. But I actually I'm not mad and don't have any regrets about how I handled it. The people I'm mad at are the teachers who knew, who we talked about it with, and the administration who I kept filing report after report with, who did nothing. So those are the people I would like to go to and tell them, like, have more compassion and do your job. Like, I can't be mad at a 15-year-old for being mean because that's what you do when you're 15, is you be mean to other people. And I was mean to other people at 15. But I can be mad and have no compassion for adults who didn't do their job. So that is what I think about a lot, is going back and yelling at the adults in the situation who didn't help me rather than the other kids.
And thank you so much for sharing that. That must have been such, I mean, it still sounds like I mean, if you're still getting nightmares, a very horrible, horrible experience.
Yeah, it was not great, but I've had a couple of the people like reach out and apologize for how they treated me. And one of them was like, I've looked into autism now and I'm sorry. I thought it was an excuse. I didn't realize what it meant for you. And so I can't like be mad at them still, just mad at the adults.
Absolutely. And congratulations on almost being done with your master's program. Any
Thank
thoughts
you.
on PhD programs?
You know, I have been really I talked about how that little boy I'm with is like my favorite case I've ever had. He's 2 years old. So I've been really interested in early intervention, so like 12 to 36 months. And then my center has been working on putting out a specific assessment for 12 to 36 months. So I think it'd be fun to take that assessment and like do the research for it as part of my PhD.
Awesome. Well, I was saying, are there any schools that you're looking into or?
Utah State has a program I'm interested in, and then University of Nebraska Medical Center has one I'm interested in, but I'm kind of like keeping doors open right now. I'm interested in anywhere that's in person and fully funded.
Yeah.
I'll go wherever if it's cheap.
We have someone, are you open to answering specific questions via email? I'm a teacher and you have such valuable perspective.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I am. I'll share the slide again that has my email on it in case you missed it. But feel free to contact me. I do get a little scared when I get emails, so sometimes it takes me a couple days to respond. I get a little bit of a paralysis, but I will respond.
Awesome. Um, I'm gonna leave it up for one more minute to see if there's any questions, but again, I can't thank you enough for doing such an amazing job today. I think again, everything you said is absolutely right. Teaching kids self-advocacy skills is so amazing. Yeah, someone said you're such a great speaker. I absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Such an amazing speaker. Um, yeah, I think we are just getting a lot of comments, a lot of positive comments. and everything you do. So again, thank you so much, Brielle, for your time today, and hopefully we can have future collaborations and maybe possibly have you teach for UCSB or come on out to UCSB for your
I
PhD program, right?
I would love to. Are you guys fully funded?
There might be some grants, so
You know what? Expect an application in the next couple of years. No, but thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you everybody for like staying and watching and asking questions. I really appreciate all of your kind comments. I always psych myself out before that everyone's gonna hate me. So seeing people say this was great is very reassuring for me.
Yes, no, I think lots of positive comments. So thank you again. And thank you guys so much for attending today. I will send a follow-up email, and Brielle, hopefully we can continue to collaborate.
Yes, thank you.
Bye, guys.